The morning route was usually predictable. Diane Rooker, a city bus driver with 15 years behind the wheel, could tell what kind of day it would be by the first 5 minutes. Kids laughing too loud, commuters staring at phones, someone always running up waving a hand at the last second. She wasn't impatient, she was precise. On a bus, precise wasn't a personality trait, it was survival. That Tuesday started like any other. The 7:10 a.m. run through Westbridge was packed with the usual mix. High schoolers with backpacks, a nurse in scrubs sipping coffee, a man in a suit tapping his foot like the world was late on purpose. Diane drove the long blue bus like it was an extension of her arms, easing through intersections, checking mirrors, managing the constant shifting weight of passengers standing and swaying. Near Maple Avenue, the road narrowed slightly where a row of parked cars tightened the lane. There was a painted crosswalk ahead and a small pedestrian island. Nothing dangerous, nothing unusual. Then Diane saw something move. At first it looked like a leaf blowing across the asphalt. Then it stopped in the middle of the lane, a tiny, low shape, and it moved again, unsteady, like it didn't know where it was going. Diane's foot snapped to the brake. The bus shuddered. Coffee sloshed. A few passengers shouted. "What the?" Someone barked from the back. Diane didn't care. She leaned forward, eyes locked on the lane. It wasn't a leaf. It was an animal. Tiny, no bigger than a fist. Something like a kitten or a squirrel, soaked and shivering, right in the path of several tons of steel and rubber. Diane held the brake hard, feeling the bus settle as it stopped short of the animal by only a few feet. Her heart hammered because she knew what would have happened if she'd been even half a second later. Passengers lurched. A teenage boy grabbed a pole, swearing. Someone's tote bag hit the floor. "Driver!" a man snapped. "What are you doing?" Diane flicked her eyes to the mirrors, checked for cars behind her. She threw on hazards automatically. "There's an animal in the road," she said loud enough to cut through the noise. "Stay seated." A few passengers craned their necks, trying to see through the front windshield. The tiny animal tried to move again and stumbled. Diane's gut tightened. It wasn't running. It was barely functioning. She keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is bus 22 on Maple. I'm stopped for an animal in the lane. Need assistance. Possibly animal control." A crackle of static. "Bus 22, confirm location. Maple Avenue near the pedestrian island. By the pharmacy. Copy, advise if traffic hazard." Diane glanced behind. Cars had stopped, some honking. Her pulse spiked because now she had a different problem. A stopped bus could cause a rear-end collision, but she couldn't move, not with that tiny life in front of her. She stood, grabbed her high-visibility vest from behind the seat, and slipped it on. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight. A woman in the front row, late 20s, ponytail, warm eyes, leaned forward. "Do you need help?" Diane hesitated. Company policy said drivers shouldn't leave the vehicle, but the animal was right there, and traffic was building. She took a breath. "Stay seated," she repeated. "I'll be quick." She opened the front door and stepped down onto the street, the morning air cold against her face. The sound of idling engines and honks filled the space like a pressure. The tiny animal was closer than she'd thought. Not a squirrel, not a kitten. A very small puppy, tan, muddy, ribs faintly visible, legs trembling like it had run too far on too little. It stood in the center of the lane, frozen, eyes huge. It didn't bark, it didn't whine. It just looked at Diane like it expected the world to hit it. Diane crouched slowly, hands out, voice low. "Hey, baby. It's okay. It's okay." The puppy took one step, then slipped and fell onto its side. Diane's heart clenched. Oh no! She glanced up. Cars behind her bus were stopped, but drivers were starting to get impatient. A man in a pickup had leaned out his window, shouting something she couldn't hear. Diane made a decision. She moved quickly, scooped the puppy up with both hands, and lifted it to her chest. It was so light it was terrifying. Its body shook hard, and it smelled like wet dirt and fear. The puppy didn't struggle, it just pressed into her vest like it wanted to disappear. Diane carried it back to the bus, stepping up quickly, and closed the door. Inside, passengers stared. A few gasped. The teenage boy in the back went quiet. The nurse in scrubs leaned forward, eyes soft. "Oh my God!" Diane placed the puppy gently on a folded towel she grabbed from her emergency kit. "Nobody touch," she said firmly, but her voice wasn't harsh. It was protective. "It's scared." The puppy curled into a tight ball, trembling. A little girl near the middle, maybe 7, whispered, "Is it going to die?" Diane's throat tightened. "Not if we can help it." She grabbed the radio again. "Dispatch, it's a puppy. I've secured it on the bus. Need animal control or an officer." Dispatch replied, "Copy, unit en route. Hold position." Diane nodded, eyes on the puppy. Then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The puppy's fur wasn't just wet, it was sticky, and on one front leg there was a thin red smear. Blood. Not a lot, but enough. The puppy lifted its head slightly and made a tiny sound, barely audible, a whimper. Diane swallowed. "Okay," she murmured. "Okay, you're hurt." She looked up and saw passengers watching, some filming, some whispering. And then, in the very back of the bus, someone spoke in a strained voice that didn't match the moment. "Driver, I don't feel right." Diane's head snapped up. A man who'd been standing near the rear door, mid-40s, pale, had a hand on the pole like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Sweat shone on his forehead even though the bus was cool. Diane's heart skipped. She'd stopped for a tiny animal, but now, right in front of everyone, something else was happening. Something that had nothing to do with the puppy, and everything to do with the word life. The man at the back swayed. For a second, it looked like he might just sit down and be fine. Then his knees buckled. A woman screamed. The man folded sideways toward the aisle, hitting a seat edge and sliding to the floor. "Hey! Hey!" someone shouted. Diane's training kicked in like a switch. "Everyone stay back!" she yelled, loud, sharp, commanding. The puppy on the towel startled, lifting its head weakly, eyes wide. Diane hated that noise, and chaos were hitting the animal, but she couldn't focus on that now. A man was down. The nurse in scrubs sprang up immediately. "I'm a nurse," she called, pushing through the aisle. Diane grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, medical emergency on bus 22. Passenger collapsed. Need EMS now." Static then. "Copy, EMS notified. Stay on scene." Diane hurried down the aisle, careful not to trip over bags. The collapsed man lay on his back now, eyes half open, breathing shallowly. The nurse knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Her face tightened. "He's clammy," she said. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man tried to speak, but only a rough exhale came out. His lips looked slightly bluish at the edges. A teenager near the back whispered, panicked, "Is he dying?" Diane dropped to a knee beside them. "What do you need?" she asked the nurse. "Space," the nurse snapped, then softened slightly. "And ask if anyone has an EpiPen or heart meds." Diane turned, voice booming down the bus. "Does anyone have an EpiPen? Any medication? Speak up now." A woman near the middle stood, trembling. He was with me," she said. "That's my husband. He has a heart condition. His nitro is in his bag." "Where's the bag?" the nurse demanded. The woman pointed frantically. "Under the seat. Blue backpack." Diane grabbed the backpack, shoved it toward the nurse. The nurse rummaged fast, pulling out a small bottle and then shaking her head. "This is expired," she muttered, then looked at the man's face and chest. "He needs EMS. Now." Diane's heart pounded. She glanced toward the front where the puppy lay trembling on the towel. The animal looked tiny and helpless, but she couldn't leave a person. A commuter in a suit stood awkwardly, phone in hand. "I'm calling 911 too," he said, voice shaking. "Good," Diane snapped. "Tell them Maple Avenue by the pharmacy. Tell them it's a bus." The nurse began guiding the man's breathing, positioning him, talking to him steadily to keep him conscious. "Stay with me," she repeated. "Look at me. Breathe." The man's eyes fluttered. A strangled sound came out. The woman, his wife, was crying now, hands over her mouth, unable to touch him because she didn't want to interfere. Diane looked around, assessing the chaos. And then, over the noise, she heard another sound. A soft whine. She turned her head. The puppy had crawled off the towel, unsteady, dragging itself a few inches across the floor. Toward the aisle, toward the collapsed man. Passengers noticed and gasped. "Stop it!" someone hissed, afraid it would bite or get stepped on. But the puppy didn't bark. It didn't lunge. It moved like it was drawn by something. It reached the man's side and pressed its tiny body against his arm. Then it whimpered, louder, like it was begging someone to pay attention. Diane's skin prickled, because the timing was too perfect. If she hadn't stopped for the puppy, this bus would have rolled right past Maple Avenue. This man would have collapsed later, maybe at a stop with fewer people, maybe in a place where no nurse happened to be sitting. The nurse glanced at the puppy, surprised. "Whose dog?" Diane's voice was tight. "Found it in the road. It ran in front of the bus." The nurse's eyes widened. "You stopped for it?" Diane nodded. The nurse looked at the man's face again, then at Diane, understanding dawning. "If you hadn't stopped..." Diane's throat tightened. "Yeah." Outside, sirens finally rose in the distance. The bus interior was hot with fear and human breath, but there was something else too, something unreal. A tiny puppy, injured and terrified, had crawled to a stranger in distress as if it knew the urgency better than anyone. Diane watched it press against the man's arm and felt her eyes sting. "Hang on," she whispered, to the man, to the puppy, to everyone. The sirens grew louder, and when the ambulance finally pulled up behind the bus, the entire street looked like it had paused. Cars stopped, pedestrians staring, phones raised, paramedics climbed aboard fast with a stretcher. The nurse gave them a rapid summary. Diane stepped back, making space. The wife clung to the seat, crying, and the puppy, still trembling, let out one more high, thin whine as the paramedics lifted the man. That whine made everyone on the bus go quiet, because now they understood. The tiny animal in the road wasn't just a random distraction, it was the reason help arrived in time. The paramedics worked quickly, practiced hands moving with calm speed. They placed oxygen, checked vitals, spoke in short code-like phrases. Possible cardiac event. BP low. Let's move. The man was conscious enough to blink, but not enough to speak. His wife followed close, shaking, asking questions through tears. Diane kept the passengers back, voice firm. "Give them room. Sit down. Now." The puppy tried to follow. Its little paws slipped on the floor as it stumbled toward the stretcher, whining again. One paramedic glanced down, startled. "Dog?" he asked. "Found it in the road," Diane said. "It's injured." The paramedic nodded quickly. "We'll get animal control here. Focus on the patient." They carried the man down the aisle, careful not to bump seats. Passengers held their breath as the stretcher passed. Outside, the street had become a tableau of flashing lights and staring faces. The paramedics loaded the man into the ambulance. His wife climbed in beside him, still crying. Before the doors closed, she turned back toward the bus, face wet. She looked at Diane and managed to choke out, "Thank you for stopping." Diane's throat tightened. She nodded once, unable to speak. Then the doors shut and the ambulance pulled away, siren rising. For a moment, the bus was silent except for the puppy's weak breathing. Diane turned back inside. The puppy lay on the floor now, exhausted, trembling less but still clearly hurt. Blood had smeared on the vinyl near its leg. The nurse returned to the front row slowly, wiping tears from her eyes. She looked at Diane, voice hushed. "That stop. It mattered," she said. Diane swallowed hard. "I just didn't want to hit it." The nurse shook her head. "Yeah, and because of that, a man got help with a nurse on board and EMS arriving fast. Timing like that doesn't happen often." A police officer arrived next, stepping onto the bus with a calm but alert posture. "Driver?" he asked. Diane raised her hand. "Here." He nodded toward the puppy. "Animal control is on the way. You did the right thing stopping, but we also need a statement about the medical incident." Diane nodded, still watching the puppy. The officer crouched, careful. "Hey, little one." The puppy didn't move much, just blinked slowly, exhausted. Animal control arrived within minutes with a carrier and a blanket. A woman named Officer Rhea Kim approached gently, scanning the puppy's injuries. "Looks like it got clipped by a car," Kim said softly, voice full of anger at the thought. "Or scraped up running." Diane's jaw clenched. "It was in the lane like it didn't know where it was." Kim nodded. "We'll get it to a clinic." As Kim lifted the puppy carefully into the carrier, the puppy let out a tiny sound, half whine, half sigh, and then relaxed slightly for the first time. Passengers watched, silent and shaken. A teenage boy who'd cursed earlier now whispered, "That dog saved that guy." Diane shook her head automatically. "I saved the dog." But as soon as she said it, she realized it wasn't that simple. The puppy hadn't called 911, it hadn't driven an ambulance, but it had done the one thing that changed everything. It made Diane stop. And that stop put the right people in the right place at the right time. Later that afternoon, dispatch called Diane with an update because it was a small city and news travelled fast. The passenger, Thomas Hargrove, had suffered a serious cardiac episode. EMS said if he'd been alone or if help had been delayed, he might not have made it. And the puppy? The puppy had a fractured paw and dehydration, but the clinic believed it would recover. Animal control put out a notice for a lost dog, but by the end of the day, it was clear no one was coming forward. Diane visited the shelter after her shift ended, still wearing her uniform, still feeling like she was living inside a story someone else wrote. The puppy was in a clean kennel now, bandaged, lying on a blanket. When Diane approached, its tail thumped weakly. Officer Kim smiled. "Looks like it likes you." Diane swallowed hard. "It ran in front of my bus." Kim's eyes softened. "And because you stopped, 2 lives were saved." Diane looked at the puppy's big eyes and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like responsibility and gratitude tangled together. She reached through the kennel bars slowly, letting the puppy sniff her fingers. The puppy licked her hand once, gentle. Diane whispered, "You were so scared." The puppy blinked. The next day, Diane got a message through the city transit supervisor. Thomas Hargrove's wife wanted to speak to her. Diane called, nervous. The woman's voice cracked on the phone. "My husband is alive," she said. "They said it was minutes. If he'd collapsed later, if he'd been driving, if—" She broke down, then breathed. "And the driver who stopped, they told me you stopped because of a puppy." Diane's throat tightened. "Yes." The woman inhaled shakily. "I don't know how to make sense of it, but please, if you can, don't let anything happen to that puppy." Diane sat in silence, phone pressed to her ear. Then she said, quietly and firmly, "I won't." That evening, Diane signed the papers. She took the puppy home. She named him Break, because the whole city already knew the story, and because she wanted to remember the moment that reminded her why being careful mattered. A bus full of strangers had watched her slam the brakes for a tiny animal, and none of them would forget what happened next. How a terrified puppy in the road became the reason a man got help in time, and how one careful stop saved a life in front of everyone.